Linux for developers. So this is gonna be the first video in a small series about Linux, targeted junior developers, programmers, computer science students, or general hobbyists with an interest in computers. These videos are not really scripted, I just make stuff up as I go along. I kind of have a loose idea of what I want to touch on, so if it seems like I'm jumping a bit around, then you know why. Also, I don't have really time to do a lot of editing, so you get it pretty raw. Some of the reasons why you might want to learn Linux or start using Linux is that it has way less nagging, way less bullshit compared to Windows. You don't get random application updaters popping up whenever you try to do something, and there's not like stock prices in the task menu, and it's trying to be default browser. The applications you use, they don't contain advertisements, and they generally don't try to get you to buy stuff. So just getting rid of all the noise, I find, is super nice. Reason number two is that you are in control. With Linux, you're in control of the operating system. It's not like a big corporation that tries to force you to use your computer in a certain way, like you have with Windows and with macOS. You decide, and if there's something you don't like, you can change it. With some experience, you can basically make it to whatever you want yourself, or probably somebody out there on the internet has done a change of the thing you don't like to something you do like. So being in control of how your operating system works, I find it super nice, and you can sort of slowly expand on it over time and build your knowledge and configure and customize it and make it yours over time. So I think that's really cool. The next point I have is that it's great for learning. If you want to learn about computers, software in general, Linux lets you do everything. So and you can dig down into all bits and pieces of it, swap things out. So it's super great for learning about computers in general. Last point I want to make is that Linux might be interesting because of the development experience. So if you're a developer, especially if you're a backend web developer, you're gonna deploy your stuff on Linux. Your software is gonna run Linux some point. So you might as well be familiar with it. And because the deployment is around Linux, tools works really well with it for that kind of stuff. Generally, because the people that make Linux are developers themselves, they tend to integrate nice development tools in really easy way. So whenever you install a command line utility, you don't have to dig around, set environment variables such that your terminal application can find the command line tool you just installed. It generally just works out of the box, and in many instances you have a lot smoother experience. Personally, I've seen things go a lot faster on Linux than it did on Windows. So years back, I used to do a lot of Java stuff, and I've seen that my colleagues that was working on Windows, it took like 10 times the amount of time for them to compile the Java project as it took me on Linux, and that actually made some of them switch over to Linux. I don't think they stayed on Linux, but at least temporarily while we were working on the project. Yeah, that was a huge benefit for them. Also heard stories and seen that stuff like running npm install, that goes a lot faster on Linux than it does on Windows. So yeah, in general, for me, I love the development experience on Linux, and it has taught me a lot about computers. I like to be in control of my own computer. Yeah, your mileage might vary. Your perspective might be different. This is just my perspective on it. Okay, so what is Linux actually? Linux is commonly referred to as an operating system, but Linux is really the kernel of an operating system. The kernel of an operating system is the thing that knows how to talk to the hardware, and it facilitates operating on files and starting applications, starting processes, managing processes. So yeah, that's basically what a kernel does. Then on top of that, you got a bunch of libraries and a bunch of user space, we call them, applications, tools, everything that the user normally would interact with. Some people like to call the whole thing for GNU Linux because a lot of the libraries that is commonly used on top of Linux has been developed as part of a GNU project. I don't want to go into that whole story things. But yeah, just so you know that Linux refers to the kernel, is a kernel, but can also refer to an entire operating system built around that kernel. You'll likely run Linux some way in your household already. If you have an Android phone that's built on top of Linux, if your smart TV or other internet up-coupled devices, maybe a router or something, they can potentially run Linux. Some do, some don't. So you might have Linux already somewhere in your household. Anyway, here we're going to talk about how to use it as a desktop operating system for your computer or your laptop. Linux comes in many different flavors. So Linux, the kernel itself, and all the libraries and applications on top, a packaged version of that is what we call a distribution. So it's Linux distributed with other things. And there are many different distributions. I want to show some of the major, but first we have to talk about release cycle for Linux distributions. So most Linux distributions, they have what is called a fixed release cycle. So packages are being developed, they are being integrated, and then a beta is released when they solve out the most bugs in that. Then it becomes a full release, people can start using it, and then the cycle goes over and over again. Couple of common Linux distributions, I mentioned Debian. Debian is one of the older distributions, and is sort of used, you can use Debian alone. Debian tends to be very stable, but because of this 2-year release cycle, it means that you can have all your applications can be up to 2 years old. So I kind of like to have the newer stuff, so Debian doesn't really work for me. Ubuntu is actually built on top of Debian, uses that as a base, and then there are a bunch of different distributions using Ubuntu as their base. So Ubuntu ships a new version 2 times a year. Generally, I found in the past that Ubuntu got newer versions of software because there are release cycles, but generally I found in the past when I used to use Ubuntu that whenever there were a new release, a lot of stuff would break. So yeah, you kind of get the benefit of having newer versions of the software, but you also probably have to go and fix stuff every half a year. And that kind of sucks. So I'm not a huge fan of I don't like to use other anymore. Fedora is also very popular. I don't know. I tried it out. It seems fine. If you don't care too much, just have a spare computer that you use occasionally, you might run a Fedora on it and call it a day. There's a bit of fiddling around with some proprietary software that could be a bit annoying. Next up we have Arch Linux. So Arch Linux is a bit different. It is what is called a rolling release distribution, so it doesn't really have any version numbers. It's updated continuously as new versions of packages arrive, they get integrated and they are available to update. So in theory, Arch should be less stable because things change all the time, but I found in practice that it's very rarely that stuff actually changes. I'm guessing that's because pretty much all the packages, they are just like they are from the package developers upstream. So Arch doesn't really do any modifications of the packages. They just integrate them, and yeah, that's about it. I've been running the same installation of Arch Linux for about 8 years now. It takes quite a bit of time to set up initially, but afterwards it kind of just works, and I can use the software that I need to without too much hassle. So that's why Arch Linux works really well for me. I should probably stop here for a bit and talk about what I mean by packages. I've been using that term a lot. So on Linux, you tend to install packages or software from a package manager instead of going to random website and then find download button like you do on Windows. For instance, like go to, if we need a video player, you might want to go to VLC and then find download and select operating system. It will download a file that you then install on your computer and yada yada. That and then each application you downloaded, it will have its own mechanism for updating. I think that's a huge mess. So it means whenever you haven't used your Windows computer in a while and you start it up, then you have all these different applications trying to update with each their own updater, and just like huge pain. And also it seems sketchy trying to find stuff on random websites to install. So in the Linux world, you have a package manager instead, and that's the main mechanism you use to install software on your computer. So basically it contains listings of a lot of different software you can install. You generally would get some info about it, and then you can click to install, and it installs on your computer. So that way it sort of looks like an app store, Play Store on Android, and I guess Windows Store is called on Microsoft World, and App Store on Apple World. Compared to those other options, here you got everything you need, and everything is updated one place. It's mostly free and open source software you will install this way, and that's really cool because they don't have advertising, they don't have paywall restricted features and other sorts of nonsense. And everything is updated with one command, and it makes sure that stuff works together. So that's really cool. So yeah, that's the primary mechanism of installing software on Linux. Through package managers, different Linux distributions got their own package manager versions, and they might also vary in what kind of packages they have available for installation out of the box, how many each have, and so on. A different way to think about package managers in Linux is it's sort of like you have your package manager for your programming language, like you have your npm for JavaScript stuff, you have your NuGet for .NET stuff, we got PubDev for Dart and Flutter world, and then we got PyPy for Python. So it's sort of like that, just for your operating system instead. Back to Arch. Arch, I find, have a lot of packages available that can be installed through its package manager. Stuff that isn't covered as part of base Arch can be provided with something called Arch User Repository. So this is a way for users to write small scripts to generate packages that then other users of Arch can use. And I find that those two things together, they pretty much call all software I ever use. So I don't have to go fiddle about with installing software, managing software. I basically can install everything both from Arch itself and from the user repository with one command, and I can update my whole system with a different command. So I find that really, really powerful. Arch Linux is known to be the most beginner-friendly Linux distribution. You don't get too much out of the box, it's very minimal, and then you configure the rest of the stuff you need yourself. The advantage is that you can customize it and you'll learn a lot by doing it. Afterwards, when you finally have the stuff set up, you know how it works. They got excellent, and I stress excellent, documentation in form of Arch Wiki site on pretty much everything you might need to do, and there are alternatives to everything, so if something you don't like, you can probably change it in some way. So yeah, it has a hill. It takes a bit to get into and set up for the first time, but I think long term you really get benefit from that initial investment. There are a couple of Arch-based distributions that makes the initial setup a bit simpler. One is Manjaro. I used to run that on my work laptop because you install it and then you got most of the stuff set up already. And then another one is Endeavour OS. The problem with Manjaro, the reason why I want to move away from it, is that they do a lot of customizations on top of plain Arch, which sometimes break stuff and have other unintended side effects. So I generally like having a stable system, and I like quick and easy access to all the different software I need. That's basically why I'm using Arch, and I find that the modifications that Manjaro do sometimes gives me a bit of trouble. So I'm not too much. Yeah, I've been using it for a while. It's good, but I had some issues with it. Another one is Endeavour OS, which is also built on Arch, and it's probably a bit closer to the plain Arch experience after the installation. It provides a nice graphical installer and super easy to get set up. So if you want to try out Linux and don't want to commit to or the configuration you have to do with Arch, then Endeavour OS might be a nice alternative. A choice you have to make when you get into Linux is the choice of desktop environment. So desktop environment is basically the graphical user interface on your computer, on a Linux system. So it's how you manage Windows, launch applications, control different settings on your computer. And with everything Linux, there's a bunch of, you got choice, you can choose between different. There are many ones to choose from. Here's a random website with a list of some of the choices. Yeah, sort of like there's a difference in how you use and interact with your computer if you're running Windows and macOS. The different desktop environments provide same sort of differences. Under the hood, it's probably the same libraries and the same Linux running, but it just looks and behaves different for normal everyday use. The two most widely used are KDE, as you see here, and then GNOME, as shown here. So choosing other, you can go wrong with. My personal preference is for GNOME. I like the applications that ship with GNOME because they're fairly simple. They get the job done and not too much else. People who like KDE, I guess probably like it because it's very customizable, and they got all sorts of toggles, so you can really customize it to be pretty much whatever you want. Some other variations is Mate and Cinnamon, Budgie, LXQT, Xface, and so on. Yeah, I'll link to a video that talks a bit more about at least the main two KDE and GNOME desktop environments. It is entirely possible to have multiple desktop environments installed. along each other, and then when you log into your system, you just get a choice on which one to use. So you don't have to fully stick with one. You can try other different, have different installed at the same time, and then you can end up finding one you like and then uninstall the others again. In the next video, I will show the installation process. I'm not gonna show every small little trick you can do. I'll just show a simple installation as how I would do it and give some pointers along the way.